Fair use this, swearing that. Alright, we get the picture. Prince of Persia: Sands of Time is one of my favourite games of all time. It had a fluent and enjoyable combat system, revolutionary and extremely fun climbing sections and puzzle solving, amazing graphics and sound, and is the spiritual predecessor to another one of my favourite games, Assassin's Creed 2. Though the things had all tied together nicely and really made the game a complete package with the story and setting. It was a post-apocalyptic, Arabic fantasy nightmare with time travel to boot. The characters were likeable and well cast, and the ending was very satisfying. Then I heard in a magazine about a Prince of Persia: Sands of Time movie being in the works, and I really didn't know what to think. There have been an endless number of games that were going to be ported to film but never were, or that have been caught up in development hell and will likely never get to see the light of day, which led me to overlook it. Secondly, the splurge of bad Prince of Persia sequels and the reputation of video game to film adaptations led me to believe that it would be a waste of time even if it did come out. But then I read something that caught me by surprise. The Prince of Persia movie was also going to be a Disney movie, and share the same directors as the Pirates of the Caribbean films. Being a fan of the Pirates franchise myself, all previously mentioned feelings were overrun with excitement and some level of hope that Disney wouldn't fuck this up. But was I about to be let down, or was I in for a treat? Well, there's only one way to find out. After a generic and mildly cheesy opening, we are introduced to the prince as a kid, who is now named Dastan as opposed to being nameless like in the games. Whether I prefer Dastan or the prince, I'm undecided. Dastan saves a boy from some guards, which is followed by a chase scene. Dastan is eventually captured by the guards, who proceed to cut off his arm, but the king of Persia interrupts and saves him as Dastan's act of courage has inspired the king, who decides to adopt the orphan boy. I must say that I quite like this addition to the plot, as it helps strengthen Dastan's relationship with his father later in the film. We then cut to 15 years later, where... Wait, that's the prince. In a street brawl. Are you kidding me? Wow, this is not the same prince from the game. In fact, Dastan's personality is quite opposite as his game counterpart. Well, as long as we're only counting the first Sands of Time game. Afterwards, we see Dastan and his brothers discussing an issue regarding weapons being sold to Persia's enemies by the city of Alamut. With the king not around to be told the full story and make a decision, for some reason, Dastan's brother Tuss decides to send the Persian army to invade the city in order to stop this treachery. Dastan sneaks around the city for a surprise attack before the rest of the army charges head-on into the city. In mid-battle, Dastan discovers an alluring dagger and decides to keep it. The invasion of Alamut is successful, and the Princess of Alamut agrees to marry Tuss in order to achieve peace, but not before realizing Dastan's newly found dagger.
Princess Tamina.
Tamina? Tamina? What? Where is it? Here. Right here. Farah. Look at that. It clearly says Farah. Come on. What the hell's wrong with Farah? Fine, enough fanboying then. Tuss gives Dastan a robe to present to his newly returned father as a gift, but the robe contains poisonous sands, or something, which kills the king. Dastan desperately tries to pry the robe from the dying king, but to no prevail, as nearby guards try to capture him, accusing Dastan as murderer of the king. Dastan is dragged away by Farah, Tamina, as the two escape the city together. Dastan comes to the conclusion that Tuss is responsible for the death of the king, as it was Tuss who gave Dastan the robe in the first place. Tamina attempts to kill Dastan while the two are alone, but by pushing the button found on the handle of the dagger he found earlier, Dastan accidentally travels a few seconds back in time. After a few moments of bewilderment, the two come to a conclusion of what just happened.
Did you see that?
See what?
Go for that sword again, and I swear I'll break your arm.
Again? If you supple the sand!
What? What is this? Incredible. Releasing the sand turns back time. And only the holder of the dagger is aware of what's happened. He could go back and alter events, change time. But no one knows but him. How much can it unwind? Answer me, Princess.
You destroyed my city.
Our invasion wasn't about weapon forges, it was about this dagger. After the battle, Tuss asked for this dagger as tribute. I didn't think anything of it, but now I see. With it, he could change anything. He could change the course of a critical moment in battle. He could foresee the blade of a rival. He wouldn't just be king, he'd be the most powerful ruler Persia's ever seen, greater even than my father. It was all about this dagger.
My treacherous brother must be brought to justice. And as such, I have doubled the reward for his capture. Meanwhile, I shall strive to protect our empire, as my father would have demanded. A new reign has begun.
So Dastan sets off to set things right, dragging Tamina along with him. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I shall sum up my first experience with this film within a single sentence. Where the fuck are the sand creatures? You know, they're not much special or anything, they're only the entire point of the game's plot. I mean, it's not like they matter. For those of you who haven't played the game, which you really should by the way, let me just quickly explain what I'm on about. In the game, the main conflict revolves around the prince releasing the sands of time from an hourglass, which turns everyone into sand creatures, which are essentially just ultra-powerful zombies. The film, however, replaces the hourglass with a giant rock, and the sands of time instead destroy the world. Because of this, I spent the entire movie wondering when the hell the sands of time will be released, until I reached a final conclusion of the film without even feeling like it had begun. The fanboy rage started to build up inside me, but then I watched the movie again and realised that when you treat the movie as a completely standalone experience, it's actually a pretty enjoyable film, even if it's incredibly generic at times. Yeah, I understand that the plot of the games probably wouldn't translate into movie format as well as this, but I was disappointed with the stereotypical Scorpion King-esque plot. Prince of Persia does have a few things that set it apart from the pack, which I'll get to in a moment, but for the most part it's very generic. Also somewhat generic is the fact that Prince of Persia is also a much more action-oriented film than it is a story-driven one, and because of this, some of the characters get considerably less development time than they deserve. Though I will admit that even with such unoriginality, it is presented exceptionally. The sets look very realistic for starters and accomplish their goals excellently, adding senses of scale, mysteriousness, exoticness, or whatever each scene is trying to depict. There are also quite a few elements that pay homage to the games. Sometimes they're quite obvious and nostalgic, and other times they're quite subtle, and I think that the element of fan service was used just to the right degree without it being forced down our throat or being completely non-existent. The music suits the grand spanning Persian Empire incredibly well, and while the soundtrack doesn't stand all too well on its own feet, there are some particular melodies that were very memorable and just plain awesome. The acting is incredibly well done and also insanely detailed. Subtle hints, looks and changes in expression make Prince of Persia a very interesting film to rewatch and analyse. If only I could say as much for the actual characters that were being portrayed. Firstly, the dramatic change in character personalities makes both Dastan and Tamina somewhat less likeable. Farah in the games was portrayed as a strong, independent woman in my opinion, but Tamina comes across as more of a rich, stubborn, persistent bitch. Dastan also seems to be fighting less for honour and glory for his family, and more of his own entertainment, though he also shows a strong bond with his father and brothers, something which was never properly developed in the game due to them all being, well, zombies. In conclusion, Prince of Persia is a Hollywood blockbuster. It ditches the plot of the games and becomes unoriginal in the process. It does have a few key things that show that creators put a lot of effort into making this film great, and even though, to me, it wasn't enough to cover up the fact that we've all seen very similar stories to this one before, there is still enough here to make this film worth watching. If you're a fan of the game like me, then make sure you keep in mind that this film is not very faithful to the game in terms of plot, and try to take on this film as a standalone title instead, because you will enjoy it a lot more if you do. Prince of Persia was obviously developed in an attempt to entertain not just fans of the game, but everyone else as well. Despite this, I would recommend the film to a general audience more than the fans, due to the fact that it's easier to treat Prince of Persia as a standalone title if you haven't played the game, and because non-fans are sure to have a hell of a lot less expectations. So instead of being a rabid nitpicking fanboy and giving this movie a low score, or just flat out praising the excellence that this film does have to offer, I'm going to try to give a score that will keep both demographics somewhat happy, while still staying true to what I believe the movie deserves. So I'm giving Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, the film, an 8.5 out of 10. Prince of Persia may be a stereotypical Hollywood blockbuster, but in my opinion it has enough excellence to make it stand out from the pack as one of the better ones, even if not by much. This is JJ, signing out.